I've been to the Ark, so thanks for coming. We have supported Brad and Joanne since 1986, 32 years. They were just starting out in ministry, and we've been with them through their whole ministry. Kathy's a classmate of Brad's, and Joanne too, I suppose, yeah. So Kathy knows them also very well and known them all these years, and we love them, and we're thankful to be part of your ministry. And we followed you from the Upper Peninsula to Sioux City, now in administration, and God bless you. You're like one of our own. Thanks, Brad. Thanks, Joanne.
Well, thank you very much for the opportunity to come and to report to you folks. Thank you for your faithful support and prayers over the years. I want to take this time period to give you an update on our ministry. And in doing that, I'm going to just kind of rehearse our ministry from the beginning. I know there are a number of you who are very familiar with that, but I thought there may be others of you who have come to the church since we were here last, which was in 2012. It doesn't seem like it's been 6 years since we've been here. It doesn't seem like 2012, frankly, was 6 years ago. It seemed like that should be like last year or something. But it's a delight to be back, and there is a sense in which we feel like we're coming home. We're coming to a place very familiar when we come back here. When we made our first visit to St. Charles, to Calvary Baptist Church, on deputation, this part of your facility did not exist. And so our early memories are of something a little bit different, but we rejoice with you in how the Lord has provided. And so we're glad for that. So let me kind of walk with you through our ministry. And it would help if I turned that on. There we go. Okay. Yes, as Pastor was saying, we have been with Continental Baptist Mission since 1985. We try every place we go. I try to tell people that we were 12 years old when we came with the mission. And so far, no one has believed us. We weren't 12, but we were quite young when we came with CBM. And I'm not sure what it is about this particular area, but we come back and you folks, you haven't changed in those 32 years. We have a little bit, but anyway, delight to be back with you. Yes, our first ministry with CBM was in Iron River, Michigan. Lakeland Baptist Church was a church plant in progress. We did not start this church. Another CBM missionary had started it, but had moved on. They'd actually had several CBM missionary pastors. And as we were well into our deputation, we were asked to go to Lakeland Baptist Church to be the missionary pastor there. So that was our first ministry, and I remember that Tim and Kelly came and visited us while we were living in Iron River. We were there for 6.5 years, and then as we felt our ministry there was coming to a conclusion, the Lord directed our steps to Sioux City to begin a church plant from scratch. Good News Baptist Church started as a Bible study meeting in our home, our family and 2 other adults, and then we moved into a couple of different rented facilities, a community center, a storefront. And the Lord added to our number during that time. There were people that the Lord brought to us. Eventually, with the help of the CBM missionary builders, we were able to build a building and of our own. And then in 2009, the church was able to graduate. They had called a pastor as a young man who had served with us. He and his wife had served with us for the last 2.5 years of our ministry there. And the church called him to be the pastor. John and Tara Woodford are their names, and John is still the pastor at Good News. We were able to drop in and visit them last month on a Sunday evening, and that was a special treat. We've been at the FBBC Missions Conference this past week. There's a young lady who's in her 3rd year at Faith, and she grew up at Good News Baptist Church. Her parents started attending when she, just a couple of months before she was born. And so it's a delight to see her there. She has a burden for Native American ministry, and it looks like the Lord might be leading her on to that. When that ministry, when that church plant graduated, CBM had asked us to come into the office to serve as the field director, which means that our ministry is largely to our church planters and to the churches that they are planting. And we love being in this ministry as well. Each one of the ministries we've been involved in, we've loved being where we were, and that's true. We love where we are. We love what we're doing as the field director for CBM. I want to share with you, just kind of walk with you through the last 2 months of our ministry to give you an idea of the variety of ministries that we have the privilege of being involved in. September and October are typically busy travel months for us. We travel other times of the year as well, but usually September and October, we're usually gone. We're usually not home. We're on the road. And so I want to just kind of walk with you through what these last 2 months have involved. Our last update we sent out just before we left on these ministry trips, and I kind of told you what we were going to be doing, and so now we can kind of walk back with you through that. And in the process of doing that, there's some prayer requests that we'll be sharing with you along the way as well. So you might want to make note of those things. We left home on September 6th, heading to Wisconsin, and as we did that, in southern Wisconsin, we met with a couple, John and Anna, who have expressed interest in the building ministry with Continental Baptist Missions. So they had submitted or had sent in an application. We wanted to meet them in person. So we had the privilege of doing that in their home. At this point, it looks like they will probably be coming with us as volunteer builders. Their life circumstances are such that it doesn't look like they would need to raise financial support, so it looks like if the Lord continues to lead the way He seems to be leading, that John and Anna will be coming as volunteer builders. Not this past week, but the week before, John and Anna had the opportunity of spending 3 days on one of our current building projects. We have 2 of our missionary builders who are in Curtis, Michigan, in the Upper Peninsula, helping Curtis Baptist Church put an addition onto their building and then remodeling their auditorium. Curtis Baptist Church was a church plant with our mission agency back in the 1950s. The 1950s, 1960s, I think, and they'd gotten to the point where they needed to add on to their building. And so our builders are there. John and Anna had opportunity to spend 3 days with them. And that's a very good taste. Give them a good taste of what the building ministry is like and an opportunity to interact with our missionary builders. When we were with them in early September, we had said, now, when you go to Curtis and work with our missionary builders, make sure you ask them how the Lord led them into the building ministry. We wanted them to hear their testimonies. And so they had a delightful time, and it looks like the Lord may be leading them this way. From there, we went on up to northern Wisconsin, to my hometown. My parents are both still living, so we had opportunity to spend a few days with them and to report to First Baptist Church in Barron, Wisconsin, which is the church that I grew up in and one of our supporting churches. And so we were able to give an update to them as well. And then from there, we headed over to Minneapolis to visit Tim and Beth Manus. The Manuses are missionaries with Continental Baptist Missions. They have a burden for the Hmong people. There are 60 to 70,000 Hmong people who are living in the Minneapolis-St. Paul area. And so they have been building relationships with the Hmong people. They have taught English as a second language to several Hmong individuals. They have children's ministries that meet in their home or in their backyard during the summertime. And each summer, Tim and Beth take a group of children over to a Bible camp in Wisconsin. And each year, that group has included several Hmong children. Through that, they have been building relationships with the Hmong people. and have been invited to an annual clan gathering. The Hmong are very clannish people, and there's one of the clans has an annual gathering, and they have invited Tim and Beth to come as their guests. So they're slowly building these relationships with the Hmong people with the desire that that will eventually result in a church plant there. Currently, as they're doing this, Tim and Beth are attending and serving at Family Baptist Church in Minneapolis, if you're familiar with that church. So we had the privilege of meeting with them, having supper with them, and just kind of hearing how their ministry is going. And so that was a privilege. From there, we moved on to the Omaha area to attend a wedding for a young man who also grew up in our church plant in Sioux City. And while we were there in the Omaha area, we received word that one of our missionary wives just very suddenly, very unexpectedly passed away. Linda Joels and her husband Ted were involved or are involved in a church revitalization ministry in Curtisville, Michigan, which is in the Lower Peninsula. A church that was established in 1880. And 3 years ago was at the point of deciding whether or not they would continue to exist as a church or close their doors. At that time, Ted and Linda were looking for the Lord's leading to their next place of ministry. And so they went to Curtisville, and the Lord's been doing a great work through their ministry there. Linda was 54 years old when she passed away, and so just a very sudden thing. So this would be a prayer request as well. We'd ask that you pray for John and Anna for the Lord's clear leading regarding the building ministry. Pray for Ted as well. He's now a single man in ministry. Linda was very, very active in the ministry in the church there. And so now he is serving without his helpmate. He's now a single dad. They have a teenage son, Russell. Russell is adopted. His birth mother abused alcohol while she was pregnant with him, and so there's some fetal alcohol syndrome issues that are involved, and so it's just kind of an additional challenge. Ted has been encouraged by the response of the people in their church ministry, their church revitalization ministry. The folks have recognized, okay, Linda is gone now. That means we need to step up and do some of the things that she used to do. So that's been encouraging, but there's still an ongoing need there. So if you would remember to pray for Ted, pray for his son Russell, and pray for Curtisville Baptist Church, we would appreciate that. The next day, we went from the Omaha area over to Lincoln, Nebraska. I don't know if any of you folks would know Betty Pulver. Verlin and Betty Pulver were church planters with CBM. Verlin passed away a number of years ago, but Betty is retired now, but still very active. It was 50 years ago that Verlin and Betty came with what is today Continental Baptist Missions. And when someone reaches that mark, we like to honor them. And so we had the privilege of presenting Betty with a 50-year service award. Her church, Temple Baptist Church in Lincoln, did a great job of planning a service to honor Betty and kept it a secret from her until that day. And so it's a delight for us to be there. The pastor's wife had shared with us that day that just within the 2 weeks prior to that service, Betty had led a lady to Christ that's involved in her Bible study in a retirement home. And so she continues to be bearing fruit for the Lord. So that's also one of the privileges that we have in this ministry, is to do things like that, to honor some of our older missionaries as well. From there, we traveled up to Mankato, Minnesota for the annual conference for the Minnesota Association of Regular Baptist Churches. During that conference, they had asked Joanne to speak to the ladies' luncheon and then to do a workshop with the ladies. And at the same time, I was teaching 2 workshops on church revitalization ministry. And so that was a privilege to be there as well. We got back from that ministry trip on September 20th, I think, was when we got back. In the days following that, we had the privilege of attending the funeral service and the graveside service for Linda Joels. And then on the 30th of September, we began another ministry trip. That Sunday morning, we traveled over to Detroit to visit Bill and Tamara Branks and their ministry. Common Grounds Baptist Church is a brand new church plant. We were able to be with them on a Sunday morning for their worship service. It's been a slow start for Bill and Tamara in this ministry. When they first moved to Detroit, they anticipated that finding a building to meet in would be a pretty easy thing. Kind of up to that point, buildings and property were selling dirt cheap in Detroit. But just at the time they arrived, they had identified the neighborhood, the Corktown neighborhood, where they would be beginning a church plant. That changed, and so they've had a real challenge finding a meeting place. But earlier this year, back around March, they were able to find a meeting place that serves them very well. And so they have started a coffee shop where they have Bible studies and then a Sunday morning worship time as well. From there, we traveled on down to Bob Jones University for their missions conference. They call it Global Opportunities Week. Lose Your Life, Find Your Calling was their theme for this year. When we're at Bob Jones University representing Continental Baptist Missions during this week, we have a lot of conversations with students. There are many of the students that will come through the display area and talk with us. I want to tell you about two of those conversations, and these would be prayer requests as well. One young man that came through and stopped at our display and talked with us is a young man named Seth. And when we are talking with the students, there's the introduction thing. What's your name? Where are you from? What's your major? That kind of thing. And Seth said that he was from Michigan. And of course, then, our antennas kind of go up and oh, where? And, I'm from the Detroit area. So we were telling Seth about our church plant and our church planters in Detroit. And that piqued his interest. I believe his major is a business type major. That's what he's studying. But Seth has this idea that he's thinking about. He's thinking about, with his business degree, going to a foreign country and opening a coffee shop that would be an English-speaking place, a place where people could come and practice their conversational English, and then to use that for evangelistic opportunities. So that's kind of the idea that he has. And so as we described this church plant in Detroit, it was of interest to him, and he thought, well, it would be good for me to learn some things from that here, while I'm in the States before attempting to do something similar in another country. And so he has been in contact with Bill Branks, talking about possibly coming to visit them when he's home over Christmas break. So you might pray for Seth and for the Lord's leading in his life. And the second conversation that I'd like you to know about and to be praying about was with a young man named Phil. Phil is actually in the seminary at Bob Jones. He'll be graduating in May. And he and his wife are interested in pastoral ministry or possibly church planting in the West. And so we talked with Phil about several of our church plants that are in the western United States. And Phil has likewise been in contact with one of our missionaries in Utah. And they are planning over the Christmas break to travel to the West and to visit some folks. And so we would love to see Phil and his wife Samantha team up with our church planters in Orem, Utah. It would be, I think, a good experience for them, and it would be really helpful for our church planters. So if you would pray for Phil and Samantha and for the Lord to lead them as well. We're very encouraged by that contact. Phil had come through our display and talked to me one day. He came back the next day and asked if Joanne could go over to their apartment to visit with his wife. They have 2 young boys, and so it's not easy for her to get over to the display area during the times that it's open. So Joanne went over and met with Samantha for a couple of hours and had a good conversation with her. So if you would pray regarding those, we'd appreciate that. And that's a part of our experience there. We left Greenville, South Carolina, and drove up to the Washington, D.C. area. Jeff and Deb Menier are in the beginning stages of planting Shiloh Baptist Church in Bowie, Maryland. And that Saturday that we were there with them was an international festival held in one of the city parks in Bowie. And the Meniers had 3 tents set up. 2 of the tents had children's activities going on, and the 3rd tent had literature for adults in a variety of languages and so on. So we had opportunity to help Jeff and Deb set up just ahead of this festival, and then we were able to stay with them through the first hour of that festival before we had to move on to get to our next place. But I was talking with Jeff afterwards. One of the activities that they had for the children in these tents was making the wordless bracelet using the different colored beads and so on. And as they did that each time, they were sharing the gospel with the children as they were making the bracelet and so on. Jeff said that they had the opportunity of sharing the gospel with about 200 children that day, one at a time. And while the children are involved in these activities, one of the other team members will talk with their parents and ask them, hey, while you're waiting for your child here, would you mind filling out a survey that we have? And so there are like 5 or 6 questions on this survey, and they have the adults fill them out. And that, if they are willing, they can provide contact information, and so they have a growing contact list. Jeff and Deb have really been pouring themselves into this ministry, doing a variety of good things and sowing the seed. And in watering the seed, it's been a slow start for them as well. But as I talk with Jeff and think about the things they're doing, I really believe that the Lord's going to bring fruit from that. And so it was a privilege to be with them that day and to see them in action, and for a short time to be a part of the work that they were doing. We went on from there then to central Pennsylvania, to our newest church plant and our newest church planters. Dennis and Tamara Seiler are planting Grace Baptist Church in Juniata County, Pennsylvania. They have covered bridges in that area. You know, you might notice that in that picture and can maybe relate a little bit. Dennis and Tamara came with us in June. They were in candidate school at the CBM office in Rockford, Michigan this past June. They are not new to ministry. They have a number of years in pastoral ministry, most recently at Faith Baptist Church in Albert Lee, Minnesota. They have had a heart for church planting. Actually, at the very beginning of their ministry, they were involved in a church plant. And then from there on to several pastorates at established churches. They've had a desire to go back into church planting. And we've been good friends with the Seilers for a number of years now. But they had said if the Lord ever led them back into church planting, they would want to do it with a mission agency. When they were in their first experience in church planting, they weren't part of a mission agency. The first day of candidate school, we'd had a couple of sessions. We took a break. We have a prayer time every day at the CBM office where we pray for our missionaries. And so we'd had our break time, and then we went back to the classroom for our prayer time. Each day, the people in our office take a card out of a little file box, and it has the name of one of our missionaries with some prayer requests and so on. And so these folks had drawn a card, and we sat down to pray. And I don't remember if I had prayed first or whatever, but it was Tamara's turn to pray. And she broke down as she was praying, broke down and was crying. And after we'd concluded the prayer time, Dennis had said, Tamara, why don't you explain, why, what was going on there, what happened? And so she shared with us that just that simple little thing of praying for our missionaries had really touched her heart. She thought back to their first ministry, church planting, not a part of an agency, an organization like CBM, and just feeling very alone. And so that little act of her just seeing that the people in our office are praying for our missionaries had really touched her heart. And so they're thrilled to be a part of CBM, and we're thrilled to have them as well, and are encouraged by this church plant. Grace Baptist Church, this new church plant, was the result of a group of people in that area who were looking for a church that would center on the preaching and teaching of the Word of God. You know, they had visited other churches in the area and just weren't finding those that really focus on the ministry of the Word, and so they had asked the Silers if they would come and help them plant that kind of a church, and so that's the nature of that. As we traveled from Pennsylvania back home to Michigan, we stopped in Akron, Ohio, where our daughter Joelle and her husband Ariel live, and their two children, Thea and Gresham. We were able to be there on Gresham's second birthday, and so that was a blessing. So you see that we have, as we travel, it gives us opportunities to connect with our family as well, and so we're very thankful for that. We got home on Wednesday and had a CBM board meeting on Thursday, and that involves both Joanne and I in that, and so we got home, but still were busy, very busy that next day. And then it was just a couple of days after that board meeting, I think 3 days later, that our son Eric and his wife Jessica and their 3-month-old son Oliver moved back from England. Eric has been working on a doctoral degree over there, not quite finished yet, but able to move back to the U.S. and finish up what he's doing here. And so it was fun to see them again. Oliver was born in July, and we'd seen him via video chats and things with them, but this was our first opportunity to meet him in person, and so that was a lot of fun. I left then just a few days later to go to Appalachian Bible College in Berkeley, West Virginia for their missions conference. This was my first experience being at ABC for their missions conference, and I was just very, very encouraged just by the spirit on the campus and by the conversations that we had as well. There's a young man who's a sophomore at Appalachian by the name of Joel, and Joel is likewise interested in the building ministry. We'd made connection with him a year earlier, and got to see him again at the missions conference this year. And so pray for God's leading for Joel. He has a couple of years yet at Appalachian before he's finished up. But if you would pray for him. Joel first learned about our building ministry when one of our builders was helping in a small project at his home church in New York. And while working side by side with one of our missionary builders, he began to think, that maybe the Lord could use me in this kind of ministry. There's another young man that I met at ABC, and I'll mention my conversation with him as well. His name is also Seth, okay? So these two young men that we've met by that first name. Seth is in the youth pastor program at ABC, but as we talked, just sharing with him a little bit about what ministry is like in a church plant or a church revitalization ministry, he began to ask me a lot of questions, a lot of really good questions about church revitalization ministry. And so I'm not sure what the Lord might be doing in Seth's life, but there's very definitely an interest there. And so we're encouraged by that. This past week, then, I got home on Wednesday night from Appalachian, and we left Friday morning then to begin making our way down here. We reported to another supporting church in central Wisconsin last Sunday, and then on to Ankeny for the missions conference at FBBC this past week. We have 5 of our CBM missionary kids, 5 CBMKs that are students at Faith this year. and a couple of others that aren't students there any longer. They finished up but are still in the area. So it was a good opportunity to connect with our missionary kids. They're not kids anymore, but we still think of them that way, and that's been a delight as well. So that's kind of what life has been like for us these past couple of months. Yesterday, Joanne and I had the opportunity to have lunch together with your missionaries, Jim and Benita Bunton, and that was a delight as well. So what these last 2 months have been like is not necessarily typical for us. It's typical for September and October. That's often, these kinds of things are what's taking place with us. And of course, during these last 2 months, in addition to these ministry opportunities that I've mentioned, there have been a number of phone calls to our church planters and so on about a variety of things going on in their lives in ministry and other things like that we're able to do even when we're on the road, that kind of thing. But hopefully this gives you a little bit of an idea of some of the things that we're involved in. And so I want to open it up for questions. Maybe something I've shared has raised a question in your mind, or maybe there's something I haven't mentioned that you had a question about. So we want to make sure that we share with you here. So any questions that you have, Pastor? Yes, good question. What are Eric's plans? Right now, they've moved to our area. They live about 10 miles from us. Eric is working for his father-in-law. His father-in-law owns a packaging business, and Eric is working for him. He would like to teach. That's his plan. Right now, he is saying that he thinks he would like to teach as an adjunct faculty somewhere, maybe not full-time, but to be an adjunct professor, maybe at several different schools. I know in the past, he has even talked about the possibility of doing something like that overseas, for short-term things. I think right now he is very glad to be doing something other than sitting at a desk and reading and writing all of the time. He's glad to be putting his, to be working physically or to be putting his mind to some other things. But so that's what he has said. It wouldn't surprise me if at some point in the future, perhaps he might consider full-time teaching. I know I am prejudiced because I'm his dad, but I've had opportunities a couple of times to sit in a classroom where Eric was teaching, and I think he has some real abilities there, my opinion. But I told Joanne once, if we were in a place where I could sit in his class every week, I would love that. So anyway, good. Thank you. Other questions? Okay. What time are we finished up here? 10:30. Okay. All right. Well, any riots if we finished early? Okay. Okay. Well, let me take us to a couple of texts in the New Testament. Ephesians chapter 6, verse 19 is the first. No, I'm sorry, verse 21 is the verse that I want. Ephesians chapter 6, verse 21 mentions a man whose name is perhaps not as familiar to us as some of the other names that we find in the New Testament. Ephesians chapter 6, verse 21 is one of those places where there's just kind of this brief mention of an individual sort of in passing. And this verse says, "But that you also may know my affairs and how I am doing, Tychicus, a faithful brother and fellow minister in the Lord, will make all things known to you, whom I have sent to you for this very purpose, that you may know our affairs, and that he may comfort your hearts." And then if you would turn over to Colossians chapter 4, verse 7. Colossians chapter 4, verse 7. And here in Colossians chapter 4, verse 7, we read, Tychicus, a beloved brother, faithful minister, and fellow servant in the Lord, will tell you all the news about me. I am sending him to you for this very purpose, that he may know your circumstances and comfort your hearts. Ephesians and Colossians, it would seem, were written about the same time, written and sent at about the same time, and it would seem that Tychicus was very likely the deliverer of these two letters, that he was the one who took the letter from Paul in prison to Ephesus, and at the same time took Paul's letter to the church in Colossae to deliver to them as well. And so he's delivering these letters, and it's apparent from these two references that he isn't just going to hand them the letter and say, here you go, see ya, kind of thing, but that he was actually going to spend a little bit of time in Ephesus, a little bit of time in Colossae. And as he did that, he was there to share news, to communicate to those churches about Paul, about his circumstances, about what's going on in ministry. When I see texts like this, we don't know what else Tychicus might have been involved in. What other kind of ministries. When Paul wrote to Titus, he'd indicated near the end of that letter that Tychicus might be coming to replace Titus in Crete. And so it would seem that he probably was involved in a variety of ministries. But at this time, when we read about him in Ephesians 6 and Colossians 4, he had kind of an itinerant ministry. And it was, we might say, a ministry of information in part. He's communicating with these believers about Paul and about what's going on. And that encourages me as I think about the kind of ministry that the Lord has given to us as well. That in the bigger picture of the work of the gospel in the New Testament, in those early years of the church, and as the gospel was expanding and so on, that there were a variety of roles in that ministry. That there were those who were boots on the ground, planting the new churches, kind of thing, and those who were pastoring those newly planted churches, staying there and ministering to the people who had been won to Christ and so on. But in the larger work, that there were roles for people like Tychicus and others that were, their ministry wasn't necessarily in one place. At least there was a period of time where Tychicus's ministry was not in one location, but that he was going to several different locations. And it was apparently important to the Apostle Paul that this information, the news about him and what was going on in his life and ministry, be relayed to the believers in Ephesus and told to the believers in Colossae and so on. He saw the importance of that, and if we looked at some of the texts surrounding this mention in Ephesus or surrounding the mention in Colossae, we would see in the neighborhood of those same texts Paul talking about prayer and the ministry of prayer. And so I think the ministry that Tychicus had was a part of that the information he would be sharing with these folks would be important to their work of prayer as they served alongside the Apostle Paul by praying for him. And so I see that, and I think about the ministry that the Lord has given to us, to Joanne and I. We loved planting the church in Sioux City, and are very grateful for that opportunity that the Lord gave to us. We tell people that in spite of the mistakes we made there, the Lord brought a church into existence, and we're very grateful for that. We're very grateful to have had a part in the establishing of Lakeland Baptist Church in Iron River, and to think about what the Lord is continuing to do through that ministry as well. And so we love being involved in those ministries. But we love what the Lord has us doing right now, as we have the opportunity to, we trust to visit our church plants, to encourage the people in these church plants to be able to meet face to face the people that the Lord is bringing to Himself through the ministry of our church planters. And we were visiting one of our mission churches a couple of years ago, and we met this lady, and her name was Marcia. And, "Oh, you're Marcia," was my response to her. And she just kind of looked at me, and I said, "Well, I've been praying for you." And she looked at me even more puzzled. And I said, "Well, your pastor and his wife had shared with us, they'd asked us to pray when they were going to be meeting with you. And so we were praying for you." And her, she was astounded by that. And she said, "That gives me the jeebies, gives me the goosebumps, to hear you say that." And I said, "Well, we weren't the only ones praying for you, Marcia. There were a lot of other people that were praying for you as well." And she just was overwhelmed by that. I said, "Well, your family is a lot bigger than you realize. Your family in Christ." And so we're thrilled to have that opportunity, and we're very grateful to you folks for your part in that, for your prayers for us as we travel. When we are asked, how can we pray for you? What are some needs that you have? The response that I give each time that I am asked that is this: pray for wisdom. Pray for wisdom greater than our own. That may seem like a general thing, but when the phone rings, I have no idea what the need is going to be on the other end of that. When my phone was ringing last month, that one Saturday, I did not expect that I would hear that one of our missionary wives had passed away. I was not expecting that at all. And in times like that, there's humanly speaking, there's a sense of helplessness. We were in Omaha, Nebraska. The missionary is in Curtisville, Michigan. And we had obligations the next day and the next days after that, and yet we realize, though, we have human limitations. We serve a God who does not have limitations, and we're just very thankful for that. But we need wisdom in those times. So thank you for praying for us, for these specific needs that we've shared with you, and for praying for wisdom. So thank you, Pastor Doug.